It is time for money, power, politics. The Federal Reserve cut interest rates again today, this time by a quarter point. Inflation is now approaching their target of 2%, and we'll have a better picture about where it stands next week. But tonight, we're also getting a better picture of what things will look like for the Fed under a second Trump administration. Here's what Chairman Jay Powell said earlier today.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
In a word, no. Our experts are here to join me. Erik Schatzker, my dear old friend, editorial director of Bloomberg New Economy, and Peter Goodman joins us, global economics correspondent for the New York Times and author of How the World Ran Out of Everything Inside the Global Supply Chain. Peter, it is no secret that many, many people in Trump world are not happy with Jay Powell. What did you make today of his clear refusal of no, not going anywhere?
I mean, I think he understands that the first institutional test of this next Trump presidency is probably going to be the Fed, because let's face it, you know, Donald Trump is a guy who treats the American debt sort of like how a bankrupt casino magnate treats a bank that's coming after him for credit. Now, unfortunately, that's not how it works in the world, because the Federal Reserve is not just the American central bank. It's the central bank to the world. I mean, it affects interest rates, mortgage rates, credit card rates everywhere. It affects foreign exchange rates everywhere, which means, you know, there are farmers in Nigeria who are looking to the Fed to figure out how much they're going to have to pay for fertilizer. It determines whether doctors in Pakistan have medicines for patients. So, you know, this is the first test. If Trump is serious about trying to get rid of this Fed chair so he can put somebody in who's pliable and who's going to lower interest rates, that's going to seriously undermine confidence in something that's central to the global economy. And I think Powell, in one word, is basically saying, I get that, and I'm not playing along with that script.
Is Jay Powell kind of like the new Anthony Fauci, right? The guy who had an extraordinarily hard job, got it done, but is still the target of so much ire?
If he is, Stephanie, he seems to be up to that job based on his reaction and response to those questions today. And let's not forget that Jay Powell has history on his side. The Federal Reserve has had some measure of independence since 1913. And there was, I looked it up today, the Treasury Fed Accord of 1951 that formally conferred independence on the Fed to set interest rates independent of whatever fiscal objectives the government may have. And of course, Paul Volcker, right? Saturday Night Special in 1980, that further reinforced the importance of Fed independence. Otherwise, the inflationary storm, right, would never have passed. So, and furthermore, I should add, it would be very difficult for Donald Trump to get rid of Jay Powell. Not only does Jay Powell have history on his side, Jay Powell has the law on his side. Now, there are things that Donald Trump as president could do to undermine Jay Powell's authority and the strength of his word, and perhaps even the amount of influence that he wields over the Federal Open Market Committee, fellow governors, and those 5 regional Fed bank presidents. He could appoint, as Scott Bessent, his advisor, has said, suggested I should add, a shadow Fed chair, somebody who would take over for Powell when his term expires in 2026. And because the markets are a discounting mechanism, pricing in the future, not the past, they would presumably be inclined to listen to that guy or woman, might be a woman, rather than listening to Jay Powell, because he ultimately would be the person responsible for setting policy at the Federal Reserve. So there are things that President Trump can do in a second administration, but sweeping away the FOMC would be exceedingly difficult. It would require either some kind of new piece of legislation, a new Federal Reserve Act, or a series of amendments to the existing Federal Reserve Act. It's tough.
Listen, we don't know what Donald Trump is going to do yet, but we do know he likes cheap money. He will want interest rates to be as low as possible because that is how you borrow. That is what spurs growth. However, focusing on inflation matters. Right. At some point, will we start to focus on the deficit? Right? Donald Trump, in his business life, was all about racking up debt. But this isn't personal or business. And if we look at the plans that he potentially has, and he wants to cut corporate taxes, maybe cut individual taxes, this is only going to balloon our deficit. At some point, do you think the American people will start to notice? Because it won't actually impact us, but that next generation who Donald Trump successfully peeled off more young voters than we've seen any Republican do since 2008, they will be the ones footing the bill.
This is not somebody who's shown us any indications that he's thinking about the long term. I mean, the one thing that Donald Trump does care about, though, is he cares about stock prices. And so the question that I have is, Donald Trump owes his next term to the support of a lot of billionaires who basically want tax cuts and deregulation, right? They're very malleable in terms of ideology, principles. They want tax cuts and deregulation. Now, do they want cheap money? Sure. Do they want it at the cost of faith in something really central to the global economy, like Fed independence? Not so sure, because, if we really get to a place where we're testing this institution and where we're testing the basic legal structure and the principle of independence, you got to think that's going to shake confidence enough that the markets could recoil, and that could get the attention.
Okay, well, you want stocks to soar? Get rid of the rules. And most likely we will see Gary Gensler, the SEC chair, or not most likely, he will without a doubt be gone in a millisecond. Great for, the crypto industry will be thrilled about it. But Lina Khan, the FTC chair, who the business community has said very loudly and throughout almost Joe Biden's entire term they're not pleased with, we'll certainly see them out of their seats. Donald Trump will choose far more business-friendly. I don't want to say business-friendly, but those who are up for no rules. And that's certainly going to. Oh, you disagree.
Oh, it's not a matter of disagreeing. There are other people in the Trump camp, like J.D. Vance, for example, who think that some of what Lina Khan has been saying and doing.
He hasn't said that in a while, though. He said it in his early days.
With respect to big tech, might actually be valid. That doesn't mean that Lina Khan will remain chairman or chair of the FTC, but it does mean that the Trump 2.0 approach to antitrust, for example, and consumer protection might not be 1,000% pro-business in every possible way. They may want to reduce some concentration of economic power, and they may, in their own way, want to influence which industries or which companies, perhaps, either do or don't wield the most power over the goods and services that Americans and for that matter, American companies have to buy.
Kamala Harris and Joe Biden sort of took a hit from people in the business community because they didn't feel like Lina Khan was pro-business.
Right.
But the funny thing is, the average person has no idea who she is. They don't recognize her name. They don't know what she does. But was there a voting population that said, I'm happy about what they're doing. I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris? Because there were people in the business world who didn't vote for her because of it.
Well, I don't know. Somebody spent a fair bit of time in battleground states for a lot of this year writing economic profiles. It's very, very difficult to try to put a narrative that's coherent on almost any part of this election or this result. I mean, I don't think a lot of people were wandering around in Michigan and Wisconsin worrying about the future.
And it takes time, right? It takes time for the antitrust policies that the FTC or the DOJ might put in place to actually have an impact on consumer prices. The lawsuit, for example, that the FTC just won against, Tapestry and its effort to buy another manufacturer of mid-priced handbags wouldn't have any bearing on the cost of those bags for some time. It would actually be the reverse. It's the cost of those bags would remain the same, as opposed to, in theory, according to the underpinning theory of the case, go up over time.